Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Roberts, and I am the Executive Director of the Congregational Library and Archives. Welcome to today's virtual discussion of the Afro-Christian Convention, the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ, a brand new publication from the Pilgrim Press. To begin with, I want to acknowledge that the Congregational Library and Archive resides in what is now known as Boston, which is in the place of the Blue Hills, the homeland of the Massachusetts people, whose relationships and connections with the land continue to this day and into the future. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Congregational Library and Archives is an independent research library. Established in 1853, the library's mission is to foster a deeper understanding of the spiritual, intellectual, cultural, and civic dimensions of the congregational story and its ongoing relevance in the 21st century. We do this through free access to our research library of 225,000 books, manuscripts, pamphlets, periodicals, and our digital archive, which has more than 100,000 images, many drawn from our New England's Hidden Histories project. Throughout the year, we offer educational programs and research fellowships for students, scholars, churches, and anyone interested in Congregationalism's influence on the American story. I do hope that you'll check our website, congregationallibrary.org, to learn more about what we do and for news of forthcoming events. Now, we have three fantastic speakers today, all of whom are contributors to this wonderful book. And they're each going to be presenting a different facet of the subject. And as I said, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to introduce all three speakers now at the start. And that way their presentations will just go from one into the other. Our first presenter, the Reverend Dr. Yvonne V. Delk, has served for 60 years as an educator, preacher, organizer, and prophetic voice, leading the fight for human and civil rights for people of color, children, and the poor throughout 5 continents. She is currently a member of the Board of Trustees for Franklinton Center at Bricks and lives in Norfolk, Virginia. Reverend Delk will be speaking first. She will be followed by Reverend Brenda Billips Square, who is currently serving as the director of the Afro-Christian Preservation Project at Franklinton Center at Bricks. She is also co-pastor of Beecher Memorial Congregational United Church of Christ in New Orleans, Louisiana. And our third presenter is Reverend Dr. Henry T. Simmons, pastor emeritus of St. Albans Congregational Church in Queens, New York, where he served for 28 years as senior pastor. He is currently the chair of the board of directors of Franklinton Center at Bricks. So I'm going to ask Reverend Delk to come up and start her presentation.
Well, Dr. Roberts, I want to thank you for this opportunity to celebrate the publication of our book, The Afro-Christian Convention, the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ. The journey to this publication has been a long time coming, and we are so grateful to so many who have made this day possible. I'm grateful for oral history and the stories that were told over and over again about the mothers and fathers who emerged out of slavery with very few financial resources, but with an abundance of faith, spirit, and courage. They founded churches as sacred spaces for liberation, salvation, rejoicing, and healing. They provided classes day and night for women, men, and children. They established a Christian college for the training of pastors and laity, and churches were planted in British Guyana and Trinidad, Barbados, and British West Indies. And Franklinton Center at Bricks, located today in Whitakers, North Carolina, exists as a 152-year living legacy to their commitment to promote justice, equality, inclusivity, and healing. And I'm grateful for those who wrote about the Afro-Christian Convention. Reverend J. Taylor Stanley, in his book, A History of the Black Congregational Christian Churches of the South. Reverend Purcell Austin, in his article, The Afro-Christian Connection, and Barbara Brown Zigman's book on hidden histories in the United Church of Christ. And I have to give a special shout out to Richard Taylor, who provided an invaluable archive of materials on the Afro-Christian Convention that he collected while documenting the Christian church. And I am grateful to the Historical Council who acknowledged the convention as the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ, and to Reverend Tracy Blackman, who made the publication of this book possible. This is a moment for the rewriting the history of the United Church of Christ and for rewriting that history. The way in which the history has been told is that of four streams, making possible that moment in 1957 when mothers and fathers processed from Cleveland's public square to the music hall to constitute a new United Church of Christ. Four streams are identified as flowing into this international body of Christ. The streams were flowing from England and Germany and Switzerland and from the United States of America. And they possessed the vision that the Church of Jesus Christ might all be one. And they believed that the Christian faith required a deeper engagement in the world. But there was a fifth stream. It was invisible to the Union at that time of the Uniting Senate. The majority of the African-American churches entering the newly formed Union were from the Afro-Christian Convention, an independent, organized, African-centered body of faith. The convention was based primarily in North Carolina and Virginia and existed from 1892 straight into the 1960s. It was composed of 150 churches, 25,000 members, 185 ordained ministers, licentiates, 150 Sunday school. We had a printing press, and it had a relationship to churches in the Caribbean and Africa. However, because all Black churches in the South that entered the Union were viewed from the lens of an entity created in 1950 by the Congregational Christian denomination called the Convention of the South, its identity, existence was hidden from view. And in spite of goal of the new denomination to become united and uniting, the decision to gather the Black constituents in the South into one conference, regardless of locations, commitments, and self-identities, dishonored the presence and the diversity represented in the Afro-Christian Convention. While it's now 66 years later, and the United Church of Christ Historical Council and the 34th General Senate will meet in Indianapolis under the theme, Making All Things New, which will include the affirmation of the Afro-Christian Convention as the fifth stream. However, the significance of this moment will require more than a public affirmation. It will require an examination of how this fifth stream in the past, the present, and future impacts the identity, the faith, the legacy, the mission, and the call of the church, especially as we face the fierce urgency of now in our church and our nation. The things that divide us appear to be deeper than that which unites us. We're living in a time of Afrophobia, critical race theory, and attempts by some to whitewash African-American history and experience out of American history. Decisions are being made about what can be taught in our schools and what cannot be taught. We are banning books, and it is unbelievable that the youngest poet laureate in our nation's history, Amanda Gorman, and her poem delivered at President Biden's inauguration, The Hill We Climb, is now banned in some places. I know that Dr. Roberts has already introduced me. However, as one of the writers of the book, it is important that I add to the introduction. I, along with the other contributors to this book, do not write from an objective perspective. We write as those who have been deeply impacted by the Afro-Christian Convention. We are among the many who have stood watch over this story in order that it might live. The Afro-Christian Convention is my story. I'm in my 84th year of life, and I'm called one of the elders and mothers in the United Church of Christ. And it's really been my privilege to serve at the national level of the church beginning in 1969, when I was called to serve as the Secretary for Urban and Black Church Education for the Board for Homeland Ministries. I remained at the national level for 20 years, serving in a variety of capacities, including as executive director of the Office for Church and Society, and having my name placed in nomination for president of the church in 1989. However, I've been a part of the Afro-Christian story for my entire life. My mother, Cora Elizabeth Delk, joined Macedonia in Norfolk, Virginia. It was one of the churches in the Afro-Christian Convention. She was in her 6th month of pregnancy, and she joined as a Watch Care member. And the Watch Care membership evolved into a lifetime membership. It would be the safe space for our entire family. I walked the aisle of Macedonia at 10, gave my hand to Reverend Hosea Scott, and my heart to Jesus Christ. I was baptized by immersion. Wherever I have served, whatever I have accomplished, it is because of a deeply embedded spiritual foundation flowing directly into me from spirit-filled mothers and fathers as they worship the divine in Africa, in hush harbors in America, from the balconies of their masters' churches, as well as in the churches that they built with their own sweat and labor. In my retirement years, I'm here back at home at Macedonia, now serving as the mother of our church. The marks of this stream and its impact on the life and witness of the United Church of Christ will be interpreted by many. However, for this discussion, I offer 4 important affirmations from our book about the 5th stream as it flows now into the United Church of Christ. First, the Afro-Christian Convention is the story of an African people from the Angola region who arrived in 1619 at Fort Monroe in Virginia as human cargo, captured on the high seas during the transatlantic slave trade. The mothers and fathers who gave birth to the Afro-Christian Convention in 1892 were African in their beliefs, perspectives, their styles of worship. As Jeremiah Wright states in the foreword, this 5th stream comes straight out of the continent of Africa and emerges above ground in the Afro-Christian tradition. The beliefs of the mothers and fathers of the Afro-Christian Convention did not begin in slavery. They were connected to a worldview that flowed from a well of knowing and being that existed thousands of years before the birth of Christ. They possessed a worldview that all life was sacred. Africa was the place where they first encountered the divine. Their meeting place of the divine was of a deity who embodied spirit and freedom. Their understanding of God was as spirit flowing in a circular fashion from the past to the present and from the present to the past. And it didn't matter how far they were removed from their homeland, African perspectives flowed in them and through them and sustained them. They held on to their belief of a God who was in all and through all, bearing them up on every leaning side. And empowered by their belief, limitations could not imprison them. And wherever 2 or 3 gathered in their ancestral conditions and cultures and ways of believing and doing were always present. This is the story of an African presence rooted in the belief that all life is sacred. And second, the Afro-Christian Convention and tradition is deeply spiritual. African spirituality begins with the affirmation that God is the spirit of life, flowing in and through everything, declaring life as sacred. There's no place that you're absent from the spirit of God. God is in the air you breathe. God is in the water, the wind, the trees. God is the connecting spirit to all of life, calling forth life out of death. To participate in Afro-Christian churches is to experience spirit-filled worship. The spirit is alive. It's incarnational, flowing through every aspect of the worship, in the preach word, in the music, in the prayers. It involves a total surrender, mind, body, and spirit to the will and way of God. Worship involves the celebration of the power to survive and affirm life with all of its complex, contradictory realities. There's no spectators, all participate. The word is experienced, the word is felt. There's joy, there's movement, there's a celebration that we are still here, clothed in our right mind, empowered by a life force that allows one to sing, to stand, to move, and to have one's being. The spirit is very alive and well in the Afro-Christian tradition. Third, the Afro-Christian Convention and tradition is rooted in community. Community is rooted in the belief that all life is sacred and the belief that God's spirit flows in all. It flows across the boundaries of individualism, calling forth community. It is the spirit of interconnectedness, coexistence, and unity. You receive life from those who've gone before you and you pass it on to those who will come after you. In sacred worship, by the power and presence of the Holy Spirit, you are connected to the spirit and testimony of the ancestors who've gone before, as well as the ones you are walking with in the here and now. You can't worship in Afro-Christian churches without receiving a holy hug, a means of making peace with each other's spirit. Spirituality is rooted in the word Ubuntu, a Bantu term that means humanity towards others. It's more fully understood through the phrase, I am because you are, and because you are, I can be also. The Ubuntu perspective forms the beloved community, produces values of respect and dignity, compassion, co-responsibility, personhood, and justice. Fourth, the Afro-Christian Convention tradition is rooted in freedom. It is a story of the power and presence of mothers and fathers experiencing the unspeakable horror of slavery and lynchings and Jim Crow and Black codes and daily attacks on their bodies, their minds, and their spirits. This is the story of a people's journey through adversity towards justice, fueled by faith in Jesus Christ. It's the story of faith, resistance, liberation, freedom. It's the story of a people carving out a lived theology and sacred worship in the heart of America's original sin, that of racism, and the church's complicity in that sin. The church in the Afro-Christian tradition represents freedom. It represents life-giving space, the space where persons can be free from oppression, free from the powers and principalities of injustice. As a child growing up in Macedonia, I was reminded Sunday after Sunday of who I was and whose I was. When my father, who worked at Calvary Cemetery Monday through Friday, entered the doors of Macedonia, he was more than a grave digger. He was Deacon Delk. When my mother entered our church on Sunday morning, she was Sister Delk. It was there that my mother and father and sister brothers and my other sisters and brothers of faith were freed from the law of a hostile environment where all the forces of culture combined to say to us that we were nobody or nothing. The preached word affirmed us as the sons and daughters of God. And when a word has been spoken over you, nothing and nobody can reduce you to namelessness again. The church in the Afro-Christian tradition became social freedom. It became cultural freedom. It provided the space for our survival and liberation. In this space, the Afro-Christian tradition appropriated the taproot of African spirituality and freedom to the Christian message. It was a message of the gospel of Jesus Christ for the humanizing of the social, economic, and political structures of our world. Freedom is the gospel. Jesus is the liberator. With this book and the Historical Council acknowledging and affirming the Afro-Christian Convention as the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ, the question now is, where do we go from here? What will be the impact of a stream that is still flowing as an African presence, a spirit-filled presence, an Ubuntu presence filled with community, freedom, and justice, not only for the United Church of Christ, but as a global witness for justice and freedom? While this tradition will have little meaning unless it produces human action, renewing and recreating faith, a stream of living water that does not press us into the future is dead. We're therefore grateful to the Congregational Christian Library and to Kyle Roberts for affirming the fact that this stream of history matters. The story of the Afro-Christian Convention, well, it continues to be documented. We've got a book now, but we also have an Afro-Christian archive. And I am so grateful that the Reverend Brenda Square has accepted as a part of her calling the position to serve as the archivist for the Afro-Christian Convention. We are still in the process of documenting. We are still in the process of gathering data. We are still in the process of testifying to this book, which we call the Afro-Christian Convention, the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ.
Well, good evening. I am Reverend Brenda Billips, and I am indeed delighted to be able to share with you our journey in the Afro-Christian Legacy and Preservation Project. You see, it all began when the members of the UCC Historical Council, visited Franklinton Center at Bricks in 2017. This is the picture that I made as we gathered together for the first time. It was the first time the Historical Council would meet at Franklinton Center at Bricks. And we were so excited. You can see the smiles on our faces. Nancy Mack, Dr. Campbell, Mother Yvonne, Dr. BBZ, Barbara Brown-Zygmunt, the UCC archivist, Ed Cade was there, and myself. We came to visit and meet with the Franklinton Center Board of Directors to discuss the history and legacy of the Afro-Christian Convention. And I am indeed excited this afternoon to give you an update on our project. During that historic gathering, we decided, the board of Franklinton Center and the members of the United Church of Christ Historical Council, that a committee would be appointed to do research. And our task was to survey existing material, to identify sources which would help us to begin to document the story of the Afro-Christian Convention in the United Church of Christ. And today I am happy to report to you that we have had amazing success. I want to stop now and thank Dr. Kyle Roberts and the Congregational Library for allowing us to share our story today. My story begins with the image of Dr. Hargett. And Dr. Hargett's introduced me to the work of the Afro-Christians on a trip we made to Africa in 1993. This photograph is the collection of materials that his family donated to the Afro-Christian archives at Franklinton Center at Bricks. This is the first deposit of personal papers from an Afro-Christian clergy. So it is indeed evidence of how the Spirit has, throughout my journey of my work in archives and documenting church history. And this collection was donated by his wife, Dr. Lorland Thunderberg Hargett, who came home to Franklinton Center to celebrate and install bricks in memory of Dr. Hargett, his father, Reverend Frederick Hargett, and his mother, Mrs. Florence Hargett. This family represents the second generation of Afro-Christian clergy. During our project, we decided that we would identify the types of materials that we needed to present and preserve and tell the story. I was specifically interested in correspondence. I wanted sermons, memoirs, writings, articles, and publications. We needed to find oral history and audio recordings and tapes and transcripts of sermons. We wanted photographs of clergy and convention gatherings. We wanted to document their families. And then we also were very interested in publications, any kind of written materials that were produced by the Afro-Christian Convention. And to our amazement, we have been able to find selected materials of those various formats that are now preserved in the Afro-Christian archives. Once the committee was established, we created a brochure, and we decided that we would partner with churches, Afro-Christian churches, to build a team, a committee of collaborators, and partners who would help us to find these records, to identify where they are, how we could preserve them, and then to help us to raise the community resources we would need to build an archival collection. As we move forward with this project, this is a photograph of Mrs. Hargett there at Franklinton Center as we celebrated Franklinton Center Day, which we will be celebrating on the first Saturday in August of this year. We have been led by the Spirit of God, the same Spirit that has led and been with the Afro-Christian ancestors to build a museum, to create a space at Franklinton Center at Bricks. And there is Mother Yvonne standing right at the entrance of the space that we are now using at Franklinton Center, because the archive actually exists. We have gone from a committee meeting and a board meeting at Franklinton Center to actually create an archive. And I'm very happy and just excited about what has happened thus far. God has truly blessed us. I want to describe to you the kind of journey we've been on. You see, it's rare that we can find board members who are willing to work in the archives. This has been an exciting project because we got grant funding from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. We were able to recruit a librarian, Mrs. Gwendolyn White. Standing there in the photograph is our project librarian who works part-time. And she is there in that photograph with Ms. Brenda James, a member of the UCC Historical Council, a daughter of the Afro-Christian Convention, along with Reverend K. Ray Hill. These persons have all worked together. You also see in the bottom photograph, Mrs. Joan Marsh, another member of the Franklinton Center Board of Directors, and Mother Yvonne Delk. They are there working in the archives. We retrieved 30 linear feet of archival records, institutional records of Franklinton Center at Bricks. And in July of 2020, we gathered and worked for 3 days to rebox and stabilize the records. The pandemic created a great challenge for our project. I was not able to visit the archives as I had planned to, but we were able to work from a distance and we did our best. These board members came and we worked together through the boxes, sorting files, reboxing and stabilizing 30 linear feet of records, which comprise the archives of Franklinton Center at Bricks. These materials had been stored in those big plastic bins and protected in the administrative basement, built in the basement of the administrative building at Franklinton Center. And I want to tell you today, they have been boxed. We've created series level labels on each box, and we are waiting for the opportunity to do full processing on those papers. Together, they document Franklinton Center's history, the history of the Convention of the South, the work of that community. It tells the story of Franklinton Center's major role in the Whitaker's community, as well as the descendants of those families who were enslaved there when that site was a plantation. We're very excited about this aspect of our journey. And so this is the group, the original committee that formed the Afro-Christian Legacy Project. The Board of Directors of Franklinton Center formed a formal partnership with the United Church of Christ Historical Council. There you see our board members. You see Reverend Irving Milton, a former director of Franklinton Center, who pastored a Congregational church as well as an Afro-Christian church. Ed Cade, our archivist. And this group has worked over the past few years to bring the project to life, to allow us to actually create an archive. We were greatly blessed because we were limited by the number of secondary publications. The history had been hidden for many years, but because of the work of Purcell Austin, BBZ, Dr. Barbara Brown Zygmunt, Reverend Rick Taylor's interest in Christian records. Rick had combed the statistical books and was very familiar with where the records were. We worked together as a committee, and I was appointed to chair that committee. And we developed a strategy as to how we were going to go out and find these stories and collect this history. And at this time, I'm happy to report that the archives have been created and established. We have acquired the foundational collection of 2 Afro-Christian ministers who were second-generation clergy, Reverend James Hargett, Dr. William Copeland, and we've also received a great reference library from Reverend Stephen Camp, who's a former conference minister at the Southern Conference. We have been wonderfully blessed and enriched in the archive to have received the papers of Reverend Copeland, and there are hundreds of sermons. His sermons are preserved in the archive. But we have not only collected original material, we have identified digitized items which have given us access to some of the original writings of the Afro-Christian ancestors. The project began as a vision in the heart of Mother Yvonne Delk. I was just blessed to be in the midst and was able to understand the hidden history that Dr. Barbara Brown Zygmunt, Reverend Rick Taylor was so excited about when I first collected material for the Amistad Research Center, which included Afro-Christian materials which were unknown, and these materials had been preserved in the home of Reverend James Hargett. Once those collections were received when I was on staff at Amistad, there was so much excitement and enthusiasm from Rick and BBC. I said, what is this Afro-Christian thing? So now I've been able to take another look at all of the materials that we preserved while I was at Amistad to understand just how this material fits in the total history of the United Church of Christ and how it illuminates a hidden story which we have not been able to share as a denomination because we have not been aware of it, but we're lifting it up. We have a book now. The story has been received enthusiastically throughout the United Church of Christ. Reverend Tracy Blackman encouraged the group to write a book. And I kept saying, we're not ready, but God said we were ready. So Mother Yvonne pulled together the writers and working together, we were able to find the publications, and you need the book because the book contains the testimonies of the Afro-Christian ancestors. You will be able to read in that 1916 publication, which has been digitized and is now online. They recorded their first 50 years of history. That publication tells the story of how people coming out of enslavement put their pennies and their faith together to build churches and create a movement that is alive today in the United Church of Christ, alive in a living legacy of 66 churches, most of whom were founded and established between 1854 and 1900. These churches are still alive and carrying on the traditions which began by those Afro-Christian pioneers. We have their testimonies of their gatherings. They met for a week in Virginia. How did they do it? They met for a whole week. And when you read the minutes, the detailed minutes, the welcome addresses from the local community, the responses represent the spirit and the faith of this rich legacy. And we look forward to being able to share more about this story and to have our entire denomination experience and embrace this powerful spiritual force that is still alive and living in the United Church of Christ. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm the Reverend Dr. Henry T. Simmons, retired minister from parish ministry in the United Church of Christ, and very, very excited about this opportunity to share in a very pivotal moment, not only for the United Church of Christ, but for Christendom around the world. It's difficult to follow Mother Yvonne Delk, as well as Brenda Square, but I want to give my testimony, in a sense, about the Afro-Christian Convention as the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ. I don't want to give any spoilers, and so I would hope and pray that all of you will purchase the book and discuss it and dissect it and be inspired by the story. The flow of the Afro-Christian stream into the United Church of Christ was impacted by the complex realities of racism in mid-20th century United States society, including in white mainline Protestant denominations. The Afro-Christian Convention stream flowed into the Convention of the South, which was formed in 1950 and placed Black Congregationalists and Afro-Christians into a new denominational entity within the Congregational Christian Church. This reflected a continued treatment of Black members as objects of mission rather than partners in mission, and dismissal of the rich diversity amongst people of faith with African ancestry. I grew up in the Convention of the South and witnessed what Reverend Dr. J. Taylor Stanley, its superintendent, chronicling the history of Black congregational and Afro-Christian churches between 1865 and 1975, characterized as two separate sources in parallel streams. Of course, the Black Congregationalist source was the New England tradition and ethos introduced through schools and churches created by the American Missionary Association, or the AMA. The Afro-Christian source, as you've heard Mother Delk and Brenda describe, was the frontier revivalism and conversion experiences of great awakenings in the 18th and 19th centuries, whose racial restrictions many Blacks left to form their own independent congregations and conferences. Differences between these two separate streams as regards theological training or education of clergy, worship styles, etc., were evident. I, as I've said, was born into the Convention of the South. Despite that fact, 37 of my 45 years of parish ministry were spent in Black congregational local churches. And I can testify that there were different views on what constituted the real church, quote unquote. The Black congregational local churches that I served knew very little about Afro-Christians and boasted that Congregationalism was defined by subdued worship featuring classical religious music, ideally accompanied by pipe organs and lasting no longer than 1 hour. It was amazing to begin to share the fact that there were other persons, other believers who had come into the United Church of Christ vis-a-vis the Afro-Christian Church. And yet those Black Congregationalists often stated that the emotionalism of worship with African traditions and roots was uncultured. And so the debate among Blacks around churches of the masses versus churches of the classes existed in the Convention of the South. Therefore, in 1957, The Convention of the South became a part of the newly formed United Church of Christ. And as Mother Delk has pointed out, the largest number of Black congregations that entered the UCC were Afro-Christians, bringing the legacy of the Afro-Christian Convention. Yet the leadership of the denomination at that time didn't acknowledge this history and lauded Congregationalism as the model for all Black churches. The goal, therefore, was assimilation of Black members via racial integration. In 1965, the Convention of the South was dissolved with the formation of the Southern Conference, with some of the convention's Black Congregational Christian churches assigned to new conferences within the UCC, and the rest remaining in the Southern Conference, Eastern Virginia, and North Carolina geographical confines. The goal, again, was integration. Yet it is interesting to note that within 15 years of its founding synod, that denominational aim was impacted by the currents of Black self-affirmation, fueled by the civil rights and Black liberation movements of the 1960s and 1970s. It was impacted by the emergence of Black theology as a legitimate scholarly discipline that created greater affirmation of African religious roots and traditions. Black gospel music and more spirit-led and field worship experiences were increasingly embraced. And so, not yielding to assimilation, the Afro-Christians continued the work of their conferences, partnering with Black Congregationalists to challenge the UCC to respond more authentically to the racism within its body. These two separate streams were brought together not by changing of worship styles, but by further affirmation of their African rootage. And so hence came the creation of the Commission for Racial Justice, the Ministers for Racial and Social and Economic Justice, and the United Black Christians. The Afro-Christian Convention stream, a tradition rooted in African persons and culture that arrived in Virginia's Tidewater region around 1619, continues to enliven and extend the UCC's life and witness. We should never underestimate the fact that the history of the Afro-Christian Convention was hidden for so long because, again, of the complications of race in American society. The Afro-Christian Convention was largely composed of charges consisting of small membership congregations, often led by vocational ministers. That is instructive from my vantage point for a future UCC. It can be enriched by awareness and acceptance and celebration of the African presence vis-a-vis the Afro-Christian Convention as its fifth stream. It can learn from the Afro-Christian commitment, the commitment to training all laity in the faith and supporting pastors with multiple charges. Young leaders can draw on the strength of these ancestors to worship fully in body, mind, and spirit as a support in the hard and demanding work of justice. Individual carriers of that African spirituality have made tremendous impacts and contributions to the 20th and 21st century global manifestation of liberation theology in the academy, church, and communities they impacted. These leaders of the past held an eschatological view, attesting to what it means to quote, unquote, believe in the already and in the not yet, as the Reverend Dr. Ivor Carruthers points out in the book. They can serve future unseen generations, as in the Franklinton Center at Bricks. It was at the Franklinton Center at Bricks, in fact, that I received my call to Christian ministry at the age of 15. So now, nearly 60 years later, I am proud to have been shaped by the experiences of incredible leaders in the church through the Afro-Christian Convention, to have been nurtured in that sense of pride around who I am and the possibilities that were open to me and to countless other young people of African ancestry based on our faith. In short, the story of the Afro-Christian Convention captured in this volume isn't a final chronicle. As further collection of yet to be revealed and research records continues, the power of this often underestimated and neglected spiritual pilgrimage will unfold and will continue to inspire the life and witness of the UCC. So once again, I am very pleased to have been a part of this tremendous writing team, and would like to thank all the other writers, authors under the coordination of Mother Delk as the book's editor, to thank them all for helping us to begin to preserve in much more conscious fashion that stream of spirituality, of conviction, of commitment to justice and freedom that began not with the formation simply of the Convention of the South or the UCC 7 years later, but that began centuries before on the shores of the great blessed continent of Africa. And I look forward to, in the days to come, discussing more of what this stream has done, continues to do, and will do in the future to extend the life and witness of our beloved United Church of Christ.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Reverend Simmons. I'm going to pull up our other presenters. We've got plenty of time for questions, and there are already a lot that are flowing in. So we'll try to get to as many of these as possible. I wonder if I could maybe start with a kind of historian's question, and then we'll move into the much better questions that other people have. And it's, you know, sometimes historians think of oral history as the history that you use when you can't find something written down, you know, and sometimes they put a value on it that's a little less than the written word. But your talk is so powerful about the sort of idea of the living witness, you know, and of the value of orality. And I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit about that tradition and why that is so important.
I'll just begin by saying that oral tradition is African. Not to say that, you know, items were not written down and so forth, but it is the telling of the personal story of one's personal encounter with God, with neighbor, with community that is passed down, and that serves as that stream. And that's why the imagery of the stream, I think Dr. Carruthers cites in her chapter in the book, that in African tradition, the stream continues to flow, but it never leaves its source. So a lot of what we are dealing with here comes from that personal connection. So I'll stop, let Yvonne.
I also want to say that at this stage in my life, it is wonderful to be called mother. There was a time that it would have been very important for me to be called reverend. There was a time that it would be very important for me to be called doctor. But I celebrate being called mother because it represents a connection. It represents the fact that I am a part of a story, and that story has to be passed on from generation to generation. As mother, in the oral tradition, it is a wonderful way to pass on the story, who we are, what we've learned, what we have done, what it has meant for us to face trials and tribulations, but what it has meant for us to have joy. We always were reminded, never forget who you are or whose you are. And it's nothing quite like having the face-to-face connection where we can sit together as family, seniors talking to our young folk. It is, in fact, listening from them and being enabled by them, empowered by them with, as we listen to all the ways that they navigate in a whole new world that is different than the world that we live in. But the oral tradition is a live, connected, human connection, feeling connection, one to the other. And it is an amazing way by which we are able to not only tell that story, but to be able to celebrate what it means to be able to navigate no matter what life means. It brings it to life. So I celebrate that oral tradition over and over again. And I celebrate being called mother.
I'd like to say, I've been working in the archives for about 25 years. And what I have discovered is that the oral history stories are always found to be accurate and backed up by written documents, material culture. When these stories get passed, there's a power in the story. And in our faith tradition, we say, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. We've got to be able to give a testimony as to the hope that we have. And that is part of the power of the Afro-Christian legacy, is there's a great testimony of faith in there. The faith that allowed them to build all these churches, and that these churches are still standing alive today. There's a power in that story, and that over and over, when the historians write the history, they will also tell you that the oral history is always supported by written archival evidence. And it's rare that you will find that oral history is inaccurate. It's very close. We might color it some, but those stories are important in our faith tradition, in our family. And we believe that one generation, as the psalmist says, shall commend God's work to the next. And so the power of the story, the testimonies, are what give us hope. And the hope of the Afro-Christian ancestor is still alive today and being passed on when we read the records, when we read their testimony, when we read the sermons. We say, oh, they made it. Wow, how did they build a church? And they just were coming out of slavery. So there's power in the story. Amen.
That's a great answer. There's a couple questions in here. People want to know more about Franklinton bricks. And one person's asking, is Franklinton a resource for all UCC churches or only those within the Conference of the South? And then there's another question. You had mentioned, what is it, 30 boxes or 30 feet of records? What's in the record?
Let me answer, give a stab at answering the first question. Is president or chair of the board of directors of Franklinton Center at Bricks. Yes, Franklinton Center at Bricks is a resource not only for persons and churches and organizations within the United Church of Christ, but for all groups that have a commitment to the advancing and the advocacy for justice and peace. It is a place for healing, for convening, for being resourced, and it is a place actually for empowering and equipping the spirits of those who do the hard work of justice. The center also, let me just finish this advertisement now, has 4 pillars of mission. The one is a conference. It is a conference and social justice retreat center where there are overnight accommodations and so forth. Secondly, it is a center for community and economic development. There's a great commitment to that immediate setting in Edgecombe County, which is one of the poorest counties in the state of North Carolina. The third pillar is that of innovative land use. We have 250 plus acres of fertile land that we're seeking to now use or continue to use in the tradition of our foreparents for that. I think I named the fourth one, Yvonne. I got the 3 in the 4th.
Conference and Retreat Center.
Conference and Retreat Center, and the Center for African American Preservation, History Preservation, which is also houses, in a sense, the Afro-Christian Convention Preservation Project. And so we're now in the process of searching for a new executive director, and we are very, very proud of the opportunity and blessed with the opportunity to continue the center's service.
Can I say real quickly too, that the center is now located on the brick side of the we call it Franklinton Center at Bricks. Franklinton Center is a part of the Afro-Christian Convention. And in 1950, there were 2 campuses, one in Franklinton, North Carolina, based on the Afro-Christian part of the heritage, and Bricks, based on the AMA part of the heritage. And in 1950, they combined it, and we all moved from Franklinton, North Carolina to the Bricks property, which is now in Whitaker's, on the land that used to be a slave plantation. It was in the context of that space where we declared that the living, life-giving ground of life that had been used for evil would be transformed into a space that we could use for life. We knew, or we understood through archival records, where there used to be a whipping post on that very site. And where that whipping post was, we in fact planted a tree. A tree was planted as a symbol of that which gives life. And we declared this space is life-giving space. And because of the African understanding that all life is sacred, it is there for life, all of life, cross-racial lines, cross-economic lines. It is there for all who seek to find a place where we can, in fact, affirm our sense of being as a beloved community, not isolated and separated from each other, but in fact, finding a way where we can pledge and commit to walking and working together. we declare that space as open, life-affirming space. And it is our hope that as the United Church of Christ continues to see the Afro-Christian perspective as not an object of mission, but a subject in mission, that it will also embrace this space as a critical space for the whole denomination. Life-giving for our youth, life-giving for men and women, life-giving for same-gender loving, life-giving for all of us as a place where we can be united and uniting for freedom and justice and wholeness in the land. We are so grateful for that question because we want to affirm very clearly, this is life-affirming space open for us all.
Did you want to give a preview, Reverend Square, of some of the things that are in the collection?
Okay, well, in the 30 linear feet we went through last July, I can tell you we have the records comprise office files, correspondence, photographs, publications, and financial reports. The subjects include Franklinton Center history, the Convention of the South, Afro-Christian history, rural life ministries, the Commission for Racial Justice, and environmental justice materials. Now together, this is a box of institutional history. These records describe how Franklinton Center has been managed down through the years. So there's a lot of correspondence with staff. And it tells the story of how the center has been able to continue and maintain over time financially. It describes the rural life projects. There was a project, a whole box of material on the Hog Project. It's a Hog Project about assisting the hog development of, pork and those projects in the community. There were economic cooperatives there that were based in Franklinton Center. The post office for the community was at Franklinton Center. And because it was the space for the AMA school bricks, you have there at that site the legacy of how the Afro-Christians and the Black Congregationalists worked together in ministry. So the story of their various gatherings, youth leadership development is told very deeply through the work of the papers of Brenda James, who has like 30 years of records on Harambe and United Black Christians. And what she did builds on the work that was done with the Afro-Christians with their camps and their youth training programs that Mother Delk attended. And Reverend Simmons had an encounter with the Lord there. So this is all recorded in these unprocessed materials that we just went through. So we were really excited, and I was just I wanted to dance. And so I was walking around just making sure that nothing got thrown away that was important.
So as a follow-up, Anna Taylor Swingerin asks, have the materials from the Legacy and Preservation Project been digitized yet or made available, or is that a next step?
No, first we have to process the material. That means that we have to get everything identified, arranged, preserved, and transferred into preservation folders. The next step would be the digitizing. Now, many materials have been digitized. IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, has provided grants. So some materials have been digitized that are at Elon. Materials that are in other libraries have been digitized. You will find the 1960 proceedings, that meeting, that collection has been digitized. So we do have access to some of the earliest records because of the digital projects. Those are all online. We have the little worship book. Reverend Taylor called it a kind of Book of Worship that A.A. Bright, an Afro-Christian minister, wrote. It's a very moving, short volume. He said, yours for history. I'll see you on the other side. He writes a book of worship. It's like a worship order, but he also has a history that is online, as well as some of the publications. You have the white Christian publications, which have been digitized. And those are, some of them are at your library. Many materials are in other institutions. What we have done in the book is we have received permission from Reverend Rick Taylor to include his bibliography. The bibliography in the back of the book as an appendix is a guide to online sources as well as secondary sources. And then we've included a list of all of the living Afro-Christian churches that are now part of the United Church of Christ. Part of our project will be to document all of the churches and bring them into our project.
How can I do commercial? And this is to say that it was just 5 years ago that we started our work on trying to put together the Afro-Christian archive itself. Mm-hmm. And we are in the process now of trying to rebuild a brand new home for that archive by taking one of the buildings that was there way back in the late 1800s, 1900s, that was used as an educational space for the mothers and fathers who were coming to that land. We want to now transform that into an archive. But that takes finances and resources. So we need help as we continue to create even a proper space for all the documents that we are discovering. Right. They have to be stored in certain temperatures and everything, as you very well know. We need a proper space for it. And so we're working very hard through one of our centers to really create that space. So we are very open to contributions for the Afro-Christian archive as we continue to collect materials and we continue to try to build a home for the Afro-Christian Convention. And as we even bring on more helpers for Brenda to help us document and preserve all of the materials that are coming to us. Commercial time from a mother, thank you.
Commercials completely accepted here. Yeah. Everyone to give early and often to this really important project. Lots of other questions here. This one from Don Hill. He asks, I was struck by Mother Delk's testimony of Afro-Christian churches as places of refuge and empowerment during challenging times. And he says, these are his words, the ways that integration diminished that role to some extent. He goes on to ask, in these challenging times, is it time for the United Church of Christ to commit to strengthening the Afro-Christian churches that exist and to plant new Afro-Christian churches in and outside of the South? Is this also part of reclaiming the stream?
Well, let me take a stab at it. I was going to turn to Henry, since Henry was with church development for a while. That was your very, that was an area. What, were you in church development?
Yes.
Right, for a while. Well, there's no question about the fact that when we ask ourselves where we are today, and where are the places that we as African Americans in this nation right now can continue to find strength, where we can continue to find those places that will not only affirm our history, but speak to our spirits and empower us for living in the midst of the times in which we now live. As a spiritual places, we need spiritual centers that do that, that enable that to happen. And we are very much affirming, and I think Brenda has already indicated that in the Convention of the South, in the Southern Conference, there are already about 66 Afro-Christian churches that exist there. And we're really grateful to Ed Davis, Reverend Edward Davis, who's the conference minister, for the many ways that he continues to support all of the churches, but especially those as they stand in the midst of being centers that speak to our spirit, that help to organize for justice and wholeness, and that continues to be a viable presence for that which the United Church of Christ stands for. And it stands for, as a church, we are standing for a world of justice and freedom and wholeness for all. And yes, there needs to be a recommitment. And I think not only a recommitment to African American churches, which I definitely say yes, but at the same time, I think a recommitment to all of our churches as we continue now to say, what does it mean for us to be the United Church of Christ in the times in which we now live? And I think the themes that run through the Afro-Christian Convention, the feeling that all life is sacred, that is critical as we stand and witness for all of life in these United States. And right now, many of our lesbian and gay sisters and brothers are being challenged as never before. There are many ways in which war is being declared on their very lives. Many of our sisters and brothers and our sons and our daughters had to leave our churches sometime in order to find wholeness. And so it's a time for us all to reaffirm all life is sacred and to build and to work for that. I think it's also time for us to figure out how we now begin to work together to make sure that the story of the whole United States is kept alive and viable. We ought to all be standing against us diminishing a part of that story. And that's what's happening in the land right now. And so the call is also a call for all of the churches to stand for what we believe in, to stand for the beloved community, to stand for the freedom and justice of all of us, to stand for diversity. So yes, strengthen those of us who are in those places that are still African American churches, but strengthen the entire church by the themes that flow through the Afro-Christian Convention that reminds us of what it means for us to be the church today.
Let me just add quickly that the power of the Afro-Christian Convention mothers and fathers was that they had a view of the long haul. They did not assume that the winds of racism and discrimination would stop blowing, but they believed that there needed to be what we would refer to as institutions, which meant the churches, the schools, and so forth. I would simply say that what we are in need of today is a movement that is infused with the spirit of the Afro-Christian, convention. And that can be done in any number of ways. But yeah, I agree that we need to strengthen those churches, but we need also to look at new frontiers that are strangely old, since we're almost back where we were when the United Church of Christ was formed. But so it's a movement to capture a sense that could be more inclusive and life-giving.
So Don has asked a follow-up, and I think he's created a new assignment for you, unless it already exists. Is there, or are there plans for a seminary course on the history of Afro-Christian churches and the Convention of the South? And I guess I would extend that for those of us who aren't in seminary. How are there continuing education opportunities to learn more about this story?
Well, we already know that the curriculum for all of those who teach teach United Church of Christ history, and wherever they are in the seminaries or the UCC seminaries, they're already hungry for the material. We've been already working the last 2 years providing syllabus for the many places in the life of the United Church of Christ with this very story. We've been doing webinars. For instance, we were meeting with the Harvard Divinity School that was there, that was teaching the history. Lancaster just did a whole webinar that they did in terms of the history of the Afro-Christian Church, Andover Newton and a number of our seminaries are already building their curriculum. They've been pushing us for more and more material. They wanted more and more material to add to the curriculum. And so we're very delighted to be able, as we find more data to resources. Of course, we're now saying that the book is a very strategic, a very important part of telling this story and needs to be in the curriculum as well. So yes, very much so. The syllabus is unfolding and it is already in place in most of our seminaries. And as a matter of fact, they've been asking us actually for more and more data about this. Barbara Brown-Zigman has been working with this for the last 2 years. And so we already know the Historical Council is ready to move right away to make sure that in all of the places where the history is taught, this story is very much a part of the curriculum design.
We also have a study guide, right, Dr. Julia
Oh, yeah.
Stroller? Yes,
Thank you.
the study guide that goes with this, yes. It's going to be online. It's going to be a PDF file, the study guide to go along with the publication. So this is going to be an excellent resource. It has a general overview of the history. The bibliographic guide is a good source with a list of the churches, and then we'll have that study guide also that will be freely available. So you need the book.
And we will make sure that everybody who's registered for this talk will get the resources that we've been talking about today. You know, that when that's available, we'll make sure we get that sent out.
Yes.
Rick Taylor, a good friend of all of ours on this screen, has been watching. He wanted me, he wanted me to ask if you might talk a little bit about Afro-Christians' connection to environmental justice.
In 1987, the Commission for Racial Justice moved its Raleigh, North Carolina office, field office, to the campus of Franklinton Center at Bricks. At that point in time, the Reverend Leon White was the director of the center and of that field office, and was pretty much involved with toxic waste kind of dumping, mostly of highway materials and so forth in Warren County, a county adjacent to the center. It was at that time that Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis, who was the executive director of the Commission for Racial Justice, had begun to really inquire about environmental justice or environmental racism. And there was a seminal report issued by the Commission for Racial Justice and one of his staff members, Mr. Charles Lee, that became pretty much the center, the hub of the environmental justice movement in the United States and in the world. And so we trace that beginning of that movement back to the campus of Franklinton Center at Bricks, but more importantly, the persons who were under Leon White's, Reverend Leon White's leadership that protested, that were arrested, were principally people who were members of Afro-Christian churches. The sense that the Afro-Christians were more heavenly minded than they were, so it's just not true. They were, in fact, frontline witnesses and advocates for not only the environmental justice movement, but going back to issues of, you know, civil rights and human rights and so forth.
There's so many questions here. I don't know how to navigate through all of them. There's a couple questions. Yes, this has been recorded, and we will be sharing this. We'll also be sharing a copy with the archives at Franklinton so that it can live on as a resource. And we would very much encourage everyone to share this with their friends and their congregations. I don't know, Reverend Square, if you know when the study guide is going to be available. People have already, they're ordering the book and they want the study guide, not to rush you, but.
Okay, Mother Delk, do we have any information as
Yes,
to?
what's happening now is in its editorial stages, and we expect that to be completed by the middle part of June. And so we're saying by July, hopefully it will be available.
Excellent. Perfect timing. Great question here about the process of becoming recognized by the UCC's Historical Council. And, question, maybe a sort of concern, if you experienced any resistance as part of that process. Maybe you could talk a little bit, maybe not everybody on here knows as much about the UCC's Historical Council and the work that it does.
Well, I first became involved when I was on staff at Amistad Research Center. I was kind of like the representative on the UCC Historical Council, and then I got reappointed. But I found no resistance because there was this tremendous interest in the Christian story. See, the Afro-Christian story has been hidden, but there is the history of the white Christians is not widely known either. And so we had two key people on the council. We had three when I was there. We had Mother Delk, we had BBZ, Dr. Barbara Brown Zygmunt, and we had Reverend Rick Taylor, all of whom were really deeply involved in researching and preserving this history. So I come along and I connected with them. And during my time on the Historical Council, I served with all of them. The interest, there was always a discussion about preservation of the Christian material. But then once we got to Franklinton Center, everything changed. It's like Mother Delk said, we had to move the council. The council had to come to Franklinton Center, because you see, we always met in the office at Cleveland. But when we got to the Franklinton Center site, there was a transformation of awareness and enthusiasm and the shared vision for the archive. And the members of the Historical Council, I didn't encounter any resistance at all. It was always great interest and a great deal of support has been my experience. Because you see, we have people on the Historical Council who are all into history. These are theologians, people who run archives, and we all like history. And so when the Historical Council gathers, I'm learning more about the Reformed Church and the various streams, but most of us knew very little about the Afro-Christian stream. So the interest was already there. And then I believe the Spirit of God just moved when we gathered together. There was so much joy and enthusiasm. Ed Cade and I were walking around the grounds of Franklinton Center. I had been there before, you see, and Reverend Milton showed me where they were growing cotton. I had never seen cotton grown before. And I was just so amazed that this place still existed and that things were still growing there, and cotton of all things, and I was shocked. I'm a city girl. I didn't realize how low it grew to the ground. And so I was just shocked, just the realization of how the ancestors had to bend down for hours and hours. So the Franklin Center experience is a transformative experience that everyone in the United Church of Christ and all people who are interested in knowing about the sacred experience that is alive there. You're walking into a unique space. You have a living legacy, you have a spiritual legacy, and you have the material culture. It's everywhere, the buildings, the trees. And so, yeah, I think that there's just so much there to learn. And the interest was high in the Historical Council. And I was just, and I'm still amazed at how quickly God has just unfolded this. So we're unveiling this history just much faster than I thought we would be able to do it.
And that's it.
God has been with us.
I like that. Just one quick word. I know we're almost over time. And that is, I want to go back to what Henry said earlier. And that is how the mothers and fathers that created this union saw African Americans. How the mothers and fathers who committed to this united and uniting church viewed African Americans. And it's my feeling that in this wonderful moment, however, race and racism still had a major lens by which African Americans were viewed. It is my belief that a big hindrance was the fact that African Americans were not seen as subjects who were coming to the table to inform the life and witness and ministry of this uniting body. They weren't seen as equals coming to the table to affirm the emerging United Church of Christ, but they were seen more as objects of mission. And that the merger, as it unfolded, viewed African Americans, I will say, as those that they could, in fact, help respond to in terms of their needs, as opposed to seeing them as an entity that could help to shape this brand new church that was emerging, uniting and united. The schools were necessary, and we celebrate those schools. But those schools ended up in having African Americans becoming just like the New Englanders in their way of worship, as opposed to affirming another style of worship. The Afro-Christians that emerged up out of that Christian movement that was there, in their way of worship, was not seen on a par with the way in which those who were creating the worship and new church. It was a different way of worship. And they saw different somehow as deficient, not on an equal scale. This is my statement of it in the midst of it. What you see in large part depends upon how you move and have your being. And it is my feeling that in the very beginning of the united movement of the United Church of Christ, the way in which African Americans were viewed also is a part of why they were never quite seen as in the same equal format as the other streams that were flowing into it.
Well, this has been a powerful presentation. It's been a joyful presentation. The final question that just came in, or comment from Cecil Prescott, says, "Thank you for this amazing presentation. Whenever I'm at Franklinton Center, I know I'm on holy land."
Mm-hmm.
And I think I need to look at some flights. I need to get down there. I need to experience this in person.
Yeah.
And I hope that everybody else watching, these Zoom presentations are great ways to begin to connect us. But I hope that this is the beginning of a connection. And we will be sending around with the recording information for those who would like to know more about how to make a contribution to support this great work, and some links to follow out all of these great resources that, and I wanted to say, reemphasize, 5 short years you have done all of this work. It took me 10 years to get my first book out. You did this in Yo, great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Simmons, Reverend Square, Mother Delk, for taking the time tonight and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.